You know what?
Senate Education Committee, April 24th, just got off the floor, now 3 o'clock. We're starting today with a review of a potential committee bill, beginnings of the committee bill. And a note just for the committee that we're going to look at today with Legislative Council St. James is kind of the first half of our jurisdiction, with the second half that we'll be looking at later this afternoon and tomorrow, having to do with the rates and with the foundation formula. Today are all the other policy sections. And so this is just something that I have worked to put together. I think hopefully, with my sense of where the committee might be on this, and just to get us started, to give us. By the way, the yellow is really just due to the bill today in 4.1 including so no, it's not. Okay, it's all together. Okay, you'll go through that then. So with that, I'll turn it over to Legislative Council to the record.
Thank you. Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. So we are going to walk through draft 4.1 of the Senate's proposal of amendment to H 454 as passed by the House. This is the first time you're looking at any language of the Senate proposal of amendment. So the highlighting is meant to reflect language that is either new or different from the House proposal of amendment.
Like the as passed the House.
Yes, sorry, the as passed the House. I'm not going to say all those words repeatedly, so I'm just going to say the House version.
That's fine. I just
And the Senate version.
Yeah.
Would you like me to share my screen?
Sure.
Okay.
Watch it.
So the first section, if you remember, the House version of H 454 started with some findings, and those have been removed for the Senate version for draft 4.1. So it starts with intent language. And the first bit of intent language is new to you all. So it is the intent of the General Assembly to work strategically, intentionally, and thoughtfully to ensure that each incremental change made to Vermont's public education system provides strength and support to its only constitutionally required governmental service. Ensure each student is provided substantially equal educational opportunities that will prepare them to thrive in a 21st century world. And actually those A and B are actually from the House, but I highlighted them for editing because they were reformatted. So C begins new language. While transitioning to a foundation formula and achieving scale, prioritize the following policy goals within the foundation formula and through education transformation. I'm on page 2 now. So these are the policy goals: expanding early childhood education, increasing after-school and summer programs in underserved communities, ensuring every student benefits from essential arts, including music, fine arts, and world languages, providing additional student access to mental health services, extending and enriching college and career pathways, beginning in middle school and culminating in graduates being prepared to take on critical jobs, high-demand industries, and raising teacher salaries to ensure that all students have access to a high-quality teacher and ensuring teachers are valued as professionals. And then this section, subdivision 2, remains largely unchanged from the House version. So it is further the intent of the General Assembly in 2026 session.
So clarifying.
I don't know. I'd love to hear from the teachers at some point how it lands with them to say ensuring teachers are valued as professionals. That strikes me as strange, but that's all.
Okay, so
In the 2026 session, enact legislation that creates a school district consolidation process. And then the rest of this remains, the language related to current technical education remains unchanged. And I'm on page 3 now. So again, this is all legislative intent, and then is in the goal of the 2026 session. I'm on line 7. To begin the process of determining how school boards will elect school members in newly merged school districts.
Can I ask
Do you only want clarifying questions for now and we save the
clarifying might be better for now.
clarifying
So-
view
No,
or
clarifying of like understanding what it.
okay. I don't know if this counts, but I wonder if it should say more than just school consolidation process, like to what end? Little I on page 214. That just feels like an incomplete sentence.
Oh, I see. Okay,
I would submit that we deal with that in our own editing process. I
Okay.
think it's kind of a blunt hammer in the middle of a otherwise, and I'm not sure it's completely appropriate.
okay, so just circle it, make your notes.
Great.
We're on page 3, line 9. We're out of the 2026 session, and subdivisions B and C are not specifically in reference to the 2026 session. And the language remains unchanged from the House. And then if we move to page 4, section 2, Commission on the Future of Public Education. Again, this is an amendment to the Commission on the Future of Public Education enabling language. And it is largely unchanged from the House with one large exception, and that is the subcommittee on the creation of school district boundaries has been removed entirely. And with it, the 9 non-voting members. But the rest of the House's changes to the Commission's charge remains the same. So I'm scrolling. So on page 10, there is, I should say there have been a couple changes. They are small. So page 10, line 7, actually just to orient you to what we're looking at. If you go to page 9, line 11, we're talking about what the commission is responsible for analyzing and making recommendations on. Subdivision A, starting on 11, is the governance, resources, and administration topic. And then if you scroll down to page 10, starting on line 5, subdivision 4 here, what roles, functions, or decisions should be a function of local control, and what roles, functions, or decisions should be a function of control at the state level. That's all current law. And then the language that's underlined was added by the House, and the language that's highlighted has been modified for this first draft of the Senate's proposal of amendment. So including a process for the community served by an elementary school to have a voice in decisions regarding school closures, and if so, recommendations for what that process shall entail.
Why is it specific to elementary school?
I don't know that,
Yeah, no, I guess I just didn't pay attention to that
Yeah.
before, but
I
that
think,
just presupposes that we're closing elementary schools in my mind. which-
and I think this may be a
Change.
reading into what it may have
Yeah,
intended. It was to ensure, to sort of protect against,
oh,
but yes, it reflects it.
I see what you're,
It looks to me like it does reflect a fear of closing elementary schools.
Yeah.
Therefore, it processed it. So we did that. That little yellow part is just a little thing, but clarifying, but we didn't get into the substance of what the House had done in that section.
So the rest of the commission's charge has been struck here. All the way to page 14, line 9. I did not highlight this, but the House kept the additional considerations charge, and this Senate version 4.1 repeals that language. So the only thing the commission would be responsible for looking at is state level governance. What's the role of AOE? What's the state board of role of state board of education? What decisions should be local control versus state control? And that community voice piece. And then the, on page 15, I'm sorry, yeah, page 15, line 2, instead of the final report of the commission being due on December 1st, it would be due on October 1st, or I'm sorry, of August 1st of 2025. And on page 16, line 1, the commission would cease to exist on August 15th, 2025, instead of December 31st, 2025. And then, are we ready to move on to section 3? Okay, section 3. This is new to the school boundary task force is new, but any language that is not highlighted is language that came over from the House language. So this language that's not highlighted in section 3 appeared in the subcommittee for school district boundaries in the House version. So the school district boundary task force, I'm on page 16, line 11, is created to determine the most efficient number of school districts and supervisory unions and proposed boundary lines based on educational research, Vermont's geographic and cultural landscape, historic attendance patterns, the distribution of equalized grand list value per pupil, the provision of CTE, and a comprehensive analysis of school locations, facility conditions, student capacity, and transportation infrastructure. The task force shall also make recommendations for an alternative process to encourage school district consolidation if the General Assembly fails to enact new school district boundaries not later than January 31st, 2026. Page 17. And this language is not highlighted, although it should. I think I warned you last time. I'm notoriously bad at not highlighting everything that should be highlighted.
But you still know where it is.
Prime example. The subcommittee on that was created in the House version had 5 non-legislative members and 4 legislative members. And this task force in the Senate version is only legislative members, 3 from the House, 3 from the Senate, not all from the same political party, nor from the same school district.
And that was the House language?
No.
Okay.
It's supposed to be highlighted.
Oh, right, you just said that. All right, thank you.
Powers and duties. The task force shall recommend not less than 1 school district and supervisory union boundary proposal to the General Assembly. So at least 1. All recommendations shall maintain the use of supervisory unions and supervisory districts. In making its recommendations, the task force may also consider and make recommendations for the optimal location of schools, including CTE programs. The proposed school district boundaries and supervisory union boundaries shall, I'm on page 17, line 17, increase access to excellent educational opportunities for all students, maximize opportunities for modern, local elementary schools, central middle schools, and regional high schools with the least disruption to students. Going on to page 18. Provide access to education for their resident students in grades kindergarten through 12. Provide access to CTE for all grade eligible students. To the extent practical, not separate towns within school districts as those boundaries exist on July 1, 2025.
That one clarifying question, what is the difference between a grade eligible student versus a eligible student?
My understanding is that would. Chair Von Gratz, would you like to answer that or would you like me to?
Go ahead.
My understanding is that is meant to signify that CTE is only currently provided for certain grades. And so the eligibility is really just based on grade level attendance and not any other eligibility characteristics.
Thank you.
I think you would accomplish the same thing with just eligible, because I think the law already accounts for that, but half dozen. Okay.
Right.
To the extent, and we talked about not separating school district boundaries. Some on line 7, page 18, to the extent practical, consider the availability of regional services for students, such as designated agencies, and how those services would integrate into the new proposed school district boundaries. And then G, allow. Yeah, I had to make sure that G was the right letter to be there. Allow for the continuation of a tuitioning system that provides continued access to independent schools that have served geographic areas that do not operate public schools for the grades served by the independent schools. The task force, so that's kind of go ahead. No, I'm moving on to number 2.
So, I mean, I guess for me, unless I'm missing something, I don't see anything about cost savings or not having kids travel too far.
Is that
Well,
accurate?
on one level, it was in the cost savings part, I can't answer this minute, but at the bottom of page 17, it has local elementary schools. And then the idea is
With the least disruption.
more centralized.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it's sort of graded up depending on as you go further up the
Mhm.
grade scale, and then the least disruption. So
Okay.
that was felt to get that.
Okay. Well, on that.
So we're on page 18, line 13. So what we just walked through is the first charge of the task force is to come up with proposed school district boundaries and supervisory union boundaries. The second charge is to come up with an alternative merger proposal. The task force shall also make recommendations for an alternative process to encourage and incentivize school districts to move toward larger, consolidated, and sustainable models of education governance. Should the General Assembly fail to enact new school district and supervisory union boundaries not later than January 31st, 2026. The task force's recommendation shall require the use of the union school district exploration, formation, and organization processes governed by Chapter 11 and Title 16, so current law. Process recommended by the task force shall be designed to encourage local decisions and actions that, I'm on page 19, provide substantially equal educational opportunities statewide, create exceptional educational opportunities for every Vermont student, maximize operational efficiencies, promote transparency and accountability, and are delivered at a cost that parents, voters, and taxpayers value. D, the House version had a public engagement section, but it was tied to the public engagement work of the commission. So the language is different, but the concept is the same. The task force shall maximize public input and feedback regarding the development of both the proposed new school district and supervisory union boundaries, as well as the alternative consolidation process recommendations. Assistance. This is a legislative committee, so it would have the administrative, technical, and legal assistance of the Legislative Operations Office, Office of Legislative Counsel, JFO, and then the Agency of Digital Services Vermont Center for Geographic Information, because I don't make the maps.
But doesn't it still need AOE's support?
We actually had a discussion. Like
Okay.
We would get the support of AOE on that.
Okay.
Okay. The joint, this language on line 14 has JFO being able to also retain the services of one or more independent third parties to provide facilitation and mediation services to the task force. I'm not sure JFO is the right office to hold that contract. I think that's would be a policy decision, whether it's Legislative Council or JFO. On page 19, line 14.
So we should circle JFO part.
Yes. Oh, just the ledge operation. It would, I would suggest that it's either ledge council or JFO. And I think that involves me having some internal conversations.
Okay.
For me, not you. And then I can make a pitch to you. Proposed legislation and map. So on or before November 15th, 2025, the task force shall submit the following to the House and Senate Committees on Education, House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs, the Senate Committee on Government Operations, the House Committee on Ways and Means, and the Senate Committee on Finance. Two things. One is proposed legislation. The task force shall submit its findings and recommendations in the form of proposed legislation to the General Assembly, which shall include the boundary proposal recommendation or recommendations and the task force's recommendations for an alternative consolidation process. And then the second deliverable is a map or maps. The committee shall also submit one, or if the committee is unable to reach a majority consensus, two detailed maps for each school district and supervisory union boundary proposal, which in addition to the boundaries themselves, shall include a narrative explanation for the policy decisions made to arrive at the proposed boundaries, as well as average daily membership for each SU or supervisory district as applicable for the 2023-2024 school year, the member towns of each SU or supervisory district as applicable, the location of public schools and non-therapeutic approved independent schools that are eligible to receive public tuition as of July 21, 2025, and the grades operated by each of those schools, the 5-year facility condition index score for each public school, the PCB testing score for each school, 10-year change in enrollment between 2013 and 2023 for each school, and the transportation infrastructure within each SU or supervisory district as applicable. On page 21, line 8,
Can I just, I thought we were interested in the property wealth. Do you not think that's important in this section?
We didn't, I didn't, let's just note that actually it's a
Okay.
possibility where, and that would be, yeah, like a, it's a product, it's a big product.
So I'm on page 21, line 8, meetings. The Office of Legislative Counsel will call the first meeting to occur on or before July 15th, 2025. And the task force would select co-chairs. One would need to be a member of the House and one a member of the Senate. The majority of the membership would constitute a quorum, and the task force would cease to exist on December 31st, 2025. Normal compensation and reimbursement, and I would just point out on line 19, there's kind of a placeholder number here of not more than 12 meetings. I think that number is significant for you all to figure out for many reasons. I don't think that you should take that number lightly. There's this task force has a lot of work to do. And you need to make sure that you have the people who are willing to attend or able to attend that many meetings.
Can I ask one?
Yeah.
I just wonder if there's a reason it has to be done December 31st, 2025, or it should follow through to the up or down vote January 31st of 2026.
You keep the task force.
Keep the task force for the month that everything's all
That's a
under consideration.
good, you can change it to the January 1st.
And then on line page 22, line 1, there is a $50,000 appropriation to JFO for the consultant. Again, I'm not sure JFO is the right person to hold this contract, depending on what the consultant would actually be consulting you on. State aid for school construction. As I've mentioned before, the language that the House passed with, I think, 3 very minor changes was the same language that was put forward by both the House and the Senate from the work of last summer's working group, state aid school construction working group. This version of the amendment, let's see, I did not make a cheat sheet for myself, so we're going to have to painfully scroll and find highlighting together. Section 4 is the statement of policy, and on line 14, there is a change here. So further, it is the intent of this chapter to encourage the use of existing public and independent school infrastructure to meet the needs of Vermont students. This is the policy section setting up the state aid for school construction chapter in Title 16.
Can I just ask, is it implied that we mean in-state independent schools?
Yes, it's definitely implied.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would say that's not,
Okay. I'm just gonna make a note.
Yeah, it hadn't even occurred to me we'd be talking about infrastructure outside of Vermont, but But fair enough, okay.
No changes, I don't believe, to the state aid for school construction program, section itself. So section 5, starting on page 23.
I am working on something. It's kind of spills over into the later section on supplemental school funding.
No changes to the state aid for school construction advisory board, section 6. No changes to the state aid for school construction special fund, section 8. I skipped over the repeal, the sunset of the advisory board. There was no change there. I'm on page 31, section 9, line 2. Approval and funding of school construction projects. I don't believe there were any changes made here either.
It's almost all, it's in fact all.
Yes, that's all of school construction. So that was the only change to the policy section. So on page 30, so we're going to jump to page 37. Line 9, section 13. So everything we just skipped over remains the same as the House version. So we're going to jump to page 37, line 9, section 13. So remember, this is the section 828 in Title 16 is in chapter 21, which is the maintenance of public schools, and that is where the town tuition program lives. If you'll remember, section 828 is the section that tells school districts what types of educational programs they are allowed to make tuition payments to. And then just, again, the example that I like to use is when we talk about how approved independent schools are eligible to receive public tuition, but recognized independent schools are not. This is the section that tells us that, because recognized independent schools are simply not listed here. Eligible. So a school district shall not, I'm on line 11, a school district shall not pay the tuition of a student except to a public school located in Vermont. An approved independent school that is located in Vermont is approved under section 166 of this title on or before July 1, 2025. And then here's the language that is new to the Senate version. Is located within either a supervisory district that does not operate a public school for some or all grades as of July 1, 2025, or a supervisory union with one or more member school districts that does not operate a public school for some or all grades as of July 1, 2025.
Okay, I think I've lost track of what a supervisory district is versus supervisory union. A supervisory district is within a supervisory union,
But district is with,
but is it just a district?
but there's a third term that you know.
So all, this is a whiskey bourbon situation.
Oh, thank you. That took me a
Okay,
second.
got you. So supervisory union
Yeah.
are our administrative units of governance in Vermont, right? They are not municipalities.
Mm-hmm.
If a supervisory union has more than one member school district, it's a supervisory union.
Mm-hmm.
If a supervisory union only has one member school district, like Burlington, it's a supervisory district. So all supervisory districts are supervisory unions,
Mm-hmm.
but not all supervisory unions are supervisory districts.
Do we need to keep supervisory district?
That is a policy question for you all. I think if you're going to have an administrative unit of governance over some parts of the state, it is at least something to explore of whether that same concept needs to be overlaid over the entire state. I think there's a lot of policy decisions that haven't been made.
Yeah, we're talking, actually,
Yeah.
we'll stick to that. I got some thoughts about that, but.
Is that clear though on
That
why?
is.
Okay.
Yep.
So then on page 38, line 4, the House version had a requirement that independent schools had to have at least 51% of student enrollment from town tuition kiddos. And this draft has 25%. And I believe the school year changed, or maybe it's the same. I don't know why I highlighted that. 2023, 2024. Okay. It did. So the House version had the 2024-2025 school year. Independent school meeting education quality standards, tutorial program approved by the state board or an approved education program are all current law and remain unchanged. Current law also allows school districts to tuition to an independent school in another state or country approved under the laws of that state or country. This draft proposes striking that language and replacing it with the language on line 12, which is a public or independent school located in a bordering state or province, provided that the school is approved under the laws of that state or province.
Is this the section where we would need a mileage boundary?
Well, if you were going to do that, this would be the place to do it.
Okay,
And this shrinks it from the existing where the tuition loans could go anywhere and shrinks it
Right.
down to bordering states or provinces.
right. I thought we had just talked at one point about 25 miles.
And then you could, they could also tuition to a therapeutic approved independent school located, anywhere. I will just note that based on changes made to this, and this may have been me, not recognizing this until now, but this as drafted would limit tuition to public schools only in Vermont. And so if you wanted tuition to go to a public school outside of Vermont, I think that that's been eliminated in this draft.
I thought
Oh, no,
public or
oh, sorry,
independent.
a public or independent. Okay, thank you.
But we also talked about Canada as a whole.
Yes,
question,
that's the province part.
which,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
Province part. So
Did we hear anybody strongly advocate for going to school in Canada?
we know it happens,
Okay,
but we didn't. There's one school, I think, the Bobby Star, that's kids from the up north go to.
So we're on page 39 now, section 14, the tuition language remains the same. So if a kiddo is enrolled currently or is enrolled for next year and the school would not qualify under the changes you're making to section 828, they could stay in that school until graduation. Section 15,
So, okay, I'll make one editorial comment here, then refraining, is that but just to make sure people understand what's going on here with the independent schools, is that it's being shrunk. The independent school must be in a non-operating district for the grades in question, and they have to have had at least 25% of their students have to have been tuition students. On the theory that we're trying to narrow it to schools that are integral to the delivery system.
but the governor's proposal and the House proposal said 51%.
Yes,
So this is the,
well, on that level, yes, but nobody else had, it didn't, no previous version had anything about having to be in a located. in a
okay,
non-operating
so it is, okay,
It's
that's
so,
fair. I was just trying to make sure I understood.
so it's got two
So
pieces,
non-operating.
both of them had an impact. So just want to make sure people understood that.
Which, can I just ask,
Yeah.
which ones are the supervisory? Are they the three that you pointed out on the map? Like that you did the map of? I just want to make sure I understand.
Nothing about this necessarily says anything about the SUs at this point. It's whether they're a non-operating district
Okay, but it says a supervisory
or
union.
SU. Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay,
Yeah, okay. Yes, in a current SU.
an SU with one or more school districts that does not operate a public school. I'm confused now. The whole SU has to be operating or not operating?
No, located within the whole SU.
But we are tapering choice from where I think I need to sit on this one for a little while.
Just a clarifying question, but I think it's going in line with what you just raised. So let's say this were to pass, the towns currently that send students elsewhere, the tuitioning towns, but also have their own school, that would stop.
But that doesn't happen now. Because if you're in a district that operates for, let's say, 9 to 12, you can't, there's no tuition dollars available. Tuition dollars are
For a
only,
town that has a high school,
yes,
yes.
tuition dollars are only available in an area that does not operate for the grades in question.
So, but K through 8. That situation, what about those towns?
There are a handful, there are some districts that are fully non-operating. So those kids K through 8 go anywhere. And there are some that operate, ironically, there's a couple that operate, that are not operating for elementary and then operate for high school. The norm is high school, but it's not the entirety of the situation. Yes.
It's the situation with St. Johnsbury Academy, and it's got a sister high school that's within 7 miles. So is the distinction here that they're currently in 2 different districts? Or how do you account for, because it's kind of, it's operating and non.
No, they're both non-operating. They're both non-operating.
Who's not operating?
Both LI and St. J.
They're not.
They're independent schools in non-operating districts.
Essex County is not operating
Not
as
all of it.
well.
Not all of it. I don't think. I don't know what the plan is.
I don't know,
Okay.
which districts are non-operating off the top of my head. What this language would do is if a independent school that meets all the other criteria it has to meet, including all the state board rules, et cetera, is located within a supervisory union that has 1 or more member districts that does not operate a public school, that school is eligible to receive public tuition. It doesn't say anything about where the kiddos have to live. But that's also means that if a school is located outside of a supervisory union, if a school is located in a supervisory union or a supervisory district that operates K through 12, that independent school would not be eligible to receive public tuition.
Okay.
So that narrows.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
I get
narrows.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, tuition transition, rules, reports, and updates. Okay, I'm on page 39, section 15, line 17. This language came over actually from the House, but I had to do some reconfiguring of language, so I had it highlighting for our drafting folks. But this section is asking the State Board of Education to do a couple things. One is to update some rules. The first rule section you're asking it to update is the education quality standards on or before July 1, 2027, to adopt statewide proficiency-based graduation requirements that would begin the 2027-2028 school year for the graduating class of 2031, and then everyone thereafter. So for the freshmen in 2027-2028. And then on or before August 1st, 2026, the State Board of Education shall initiate rulemaking to amend the approved independent school rule series to ensure compliance with the requirements that we just walked through in section 828. So you want to make sure that the rules are consistent with what's in statute. That's all that's being asked here.
So we have education quality standards,
Correct.
but they are not considered graduation requirement.
No.
They're just considered
Education
guidelines.
Education quality standards encompass many different things,
Okay.
including best practices for certain things. I can't think of a more eloquent way to say it, but education quality standards are just that, the quality standards for our public education system. Graduation requirements currently are local. There is a section in the education quality standards rule series right now regarding graduation requirements. But it is not a statewide mandate. There are some guidance, but it is not every graduating senior has to meet the same requirements. Graduation requirements right now are adopted locally.
And I just want to make sure I understand that requirement means, like, right now, each district can decide if a student is not ready to graduate. And this would standardize that metric.
Well, they have different requirements in the first instance.
Yeah.
Right, but those requirements still have the consequence of a student being held back a grade or not graduating high school.
Theoretically.
Okay.
And like I said, for your purposes and the purposes of this walkthrough, this language probably should not be highlighted because the concept came over from the house, but I had to reconfigure it to fit into this draft. And then the requirement that the State Board of Education submit to you all a report with proposed standards for schools to be deemed small by necessity is kept the same.
So is 2 saying that the State Board of Education will take those graduation requirements and apply them to independent schools?
No, that's separate. This is to have the rules line up with what we just talked about, 25% of that.
Okay. But if a school is receiving tuition, then they also have to meet the proficiency-based graduation requirements?
No. Education quality standards do not apply to private schools, to independent schools.
Okay. Is that?
That's a policy choice.
Right, okay. Yep.
There is a process for independent schools to follow education quality standards. It's literally called an approved independent school who meets educational quality standards. I believe and it's substantially complied with, and I believe that there's one. Okay.
There's a part that's distracting me in all of this. Where in all of this is the foundation formula? And
It's next.
it's in a separate.
Well, it'll be the continuation of this. It's John's section. We're gonna hear that next.
Oh, it's not in this chunk of paper that we.
No, it's not in this chunk
Okay.
of paper. It will be the next chunk that then be.
Okay.
Build it together.
And make sure we don't
Yeah.
get out of our.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to know that I'm captivating you and you're not just trying to find the finance language. Good to know.
I'll just flag that I just struggle with the small by necessity thing. I just struggle with it.
What's for?
I don't know how in the next 6 months we're gonna answer that question in a way that's satisfactory and have already implemented the foundation formula and why that would then be, maybe we could say they could keep working on like class size minimums or something, but I don't like the small by necessity piece. I just don't think it's helpful. I good question mark. Everyone.
Okay, page 40, line 15, section 16. This section largely remains unchanged from the house. I think the only thing that happened is there were pieces that were removed. So this is report back to you all on some things. Although subsection A is actually not a report back to you all, it's a report to the State Board of Education. So subsection A is requiring AOE to make recommendations to the State Board of Education for those statewide graduation requirements. And then the state board would adopt them or consider them when they are going through rulemaking. And then on page 41, line 1, subsection B is a requirement that AOE report back to you all on certain things by December 1, 2025. So a proposed implementation plan for statewide financial data and student information systems. What does the school construction division look like? A progress report on the type of guidance that the agency would provide to the field for mergers. Whatever those mergers look like, what are all of the processes that need to happen? And an estimate of costs associated with that support work. And then on page 42, in consultation with superintendents, directors of therapeutic independent schools, special education directors, and in the opinion of the agency, other experts, recommendations for the need for cooperative education services and the oversight of therapeutic schools within school governance framework, both at state and local level. Section 17 on page 42 is that sunset review. Again, this remains unchanged from the House version. Sunset review of the state board rules. So asking the state board to look at all of their rules and come back to all of you with a report by December 1st, 2026 of which rules are no longer needed. And for the rules that are still needed, what's their plan to update them? What's the order they're going to update those rules in? And then $200,000 appropriation from the general fund to the State Board of Education for the contracted resources necessary to do that review.
You know that from the budget letter. Everybody.
The education funding section remains unchanged. Again, this is the language that came to you in the, not just the House passed version of this bill, but also the budget. Although the subsection B on page 43 only came over in H454, it's not in the budget, but the subsection F traveled in both vehicles. There were adult education funding report on how should adult education funding be calculated and distributed. That report requirement remains unchanged. On page 45, sections 20, 21, and 22 remain largely unchanged as they were passed by the House with a large caveat. So these sections, the special education sections, were drafted and passed by the House so section 20 is asking the Agency of Education to report back to you on essentially a written report addressing the factors contributing to growth in extraordinary special education reimbursement costs. What's the state of implementation of Act 173? And what's the current state of supports for students with disabilities in Vermont? And then what are recommended changes necessary to meet certain goals? The language passed by the House also included language that all of this information was to come to you with the ultimate goal being to work towards a weighted special education weight in the foundation formula. Anything referencing a special education weight or the foundation formula has been removed from these three sections. And it's just a report back essentially on the state of special education delivery in the state.
On line 18, what is the rising extraordinary special education?
What page are you on?
Page 45.
I think that is what you are asking them to report back to you all on. I believe the House received testimony, and you all have received testimony over the past several years, that extraordinary special education costs, which are those above the census block grant.
Does it need to say cost?
Oh, yes, managing the rising.
We're ready.
Yes.
We're in. What line?
17 to 18. I didn't know if it was a typo
No,
or I
it must
didn't
be
know
a
something
typo.
about what
Nope.
extraordinary special education rising
Yeah.
is.
Nope, that's a great catch. So these sections, so section 1 is a report back to you all on essentially the state of special education. It's the same language that I walked through. It's the same language that the House passed with it.
I feel like I'm a nodder right now, but why would you say extraordinary?
That's the term used.
Is for
Is it
special
the-
education?
Extraordinary expenses.
Beyond the block. And beyond the-
Yeah, okay. It says rising extraordinary special education costs. That's the sentence people understand. Okay, fine.
Leave. I'm just pulling up.
I don't know why they need rising. Just both seems like kind of a really dramatic phrasing all of a sudden.
So extraordinary special education reimbursement is literally the title of a section in Title 16.
Okay, so would we say education reimbursements there?
I think either term is fine.
Okay.
Yes. Do you have any questions about the special education section? Then I believe that finishes out the policy sections. The effective dates haven't changed.
Can I just don't like language that I don't understand actually will give us like a very specific result. So I'm looking at page 46, line 3, ensuring that the delivery of special education is responsive to student needs. I would hope so. Like, I don't know what that actually accomplishes.
This came over from the House,
Yeah,
not touched.
right. Just looking.
So it's
thinking.
just, so it's a report, and one of the things they want to accomplish is to make sure, I guess, the special education is responsive to student needs, as opposed to not being responsive. So I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Someone wants to.
Presumably, there was some testimony to the effect that it may not be responsive.
I think another way to state it is meeting student needs.
Okay. How would that be measured?
I'm not suggesting.
Yeah, no.
That would be a question for the field.
Okay. I just don't, meeting students' needs doesn't feel like a measurable thing. I circled it.
So I have finished walking through draft 4.1 of the Senate proposal of amendment.
Okay, sorry. Now that we've had so much conversation about extraordinary anything, number 5 says addressing drivers of growth of extraordinary. There's just too many words in this section, honestly. It's just, but that's the same thing, but said differently. That's in 1. And is it not? Is it a different thing?
I don't think it would be productive for me to debate with you whether it's the
Okay.
same or the not. I think what would be most productive is to receive, you all can have a conversation,
Well-
and then for me to receive direction
Okay.
on language
Great.
changes.
Well, it is important, though, that we understand that extraordinary special education costs is a thing.
Yes,
And so that term
Right.
is a term we must utilize. And if there's ways to clarify when we use it, what we're actually talking about, that's one thing we have to remember, that is a term of our.
it is literally defined.
Okay. It's just used twice in the same sections, but I'll figure that out. That's better.
You want to,
But just, we're talking about a part of this plan being educational quality standards. Is there, if they're not defined, somebody not defined quality standards, special ed, I'm sure they are. Need to be more.
I think you should ask all of your questions. So my understanding is that a lot of the information or data that is reflected in section 20, there have been I don't know the right word to use. It seems as though the agency may already be either collecting or holding this information as part of the due course of business. But I can't verify that or speak to that. So I would suggest if you have specific questions about how easy it is to obtain this information, or whether the folks collecting this information feel as though the language is specific enough, those would be great
Mhm.
questions to pose to the field.
Great.
so I would note for the committee, just so that it's not done by totally by mission, that what's not in here, you will note, is anything about school size or class size, which was prevalent in the House version. And so that has been taken out, except for the one place where we mentioned the notion of community schools, more centralized middle schools, and then regional high schools. But the notion of mandated minimums is not contained in this version. So I want people to make sure they understand that. So any other questions while we have Beth?
Does this also take out the ward passports?
Yes.
I'm good with that.
On the theory that would be done by the I'll go up if we get to that point. That might, yeah.
I'm sorry, actually, you've opened the door, so I'm going to put my foot in. This is my soapbox. if you are contemplating seriously, and I don't need to know if it's serious, I'm just saying this. The legislature drawing wards next year or doing any sort of apportionment, you need to be appropriately staffed to do that. And you are not right now. You do not have the mapping software and you do not have a mapping specialist on staff. If you expect to do that at any point during the 2026 session, I would encourage you to start exploring whether there needs to be a provision of money in the budget this year for contracts executed this fall or summer to do that work. If you haven't done that, my office is not going to be able to draw maps,
Oh,
apportionment maps. I can't draw a map even of my neighborhood, so.
Yeah. Senator Rushing.
On that point, I'm looking at section 3, the school district boundary task force report and the maps and the membership of it. In the previous version, were there map makers in that committee?
No, both of these versions, the Senate version and the House version, asked for the Agency of Digital Services Vermont Center for Geographic Information to provide assistance. And I think I am not a map maker. I'm not a cartographer. This is just based on my work in this area this year, in this session. I think the level of detail and manipulation needed to create boundary lines is different than the level of detail and manipulation needed to create ward lines. And that I think it's an open question as to whether the Agency of Digital Services can even provide what you're asking for here. But to your point, no, there was the Agency of Digital Services has been put in the assistance section of both versions.
So what it is, we're thinking about the maps for districts are much easier than getting the boards.
I guess,
It's much more complicated.
yeah, the only thing that I think has value is asking the district map group what they would recommend for the ward development process. And I say that because I have not been convinced otherwise that we leave internal governance decisions to local municipalities and districts about how they want to structure their governance and how many people they want to have from each town and all of that. And I don't see a compelling reason for us to create standardized boards across the state.
Can I offer something?
Yeah.
I am not taking a policy position. That is not my job. And I am not doing that here.
Mhm.
I'm just making sure that you have the right information to make your policy choices.
Mm-hmm.
If the legislature is creating school districts,
Mm-hmm.
if you are chartering municipalities, you are going to need to at least establish some form of representation to get them started. And you could make a policy choice to allow school districts, once they're up and running, to change that representation model. How they do that will be dependent on whether you are chartering school districts, whether there's just one titled statute that applies to everyone, and so they would need to seek a change to statute, or whether they would need to seek a charter change, etc. If you are just saying, like Act 46, talk among themselves
Mm-hmm.
and form larger school districts through the Chapter 11 Union School District process, then part of that process is figuring out the representation models to go out to the voters when they're even voting whether to form those merged districts.
Right.
But if you all are creating them, you have to at least start with something.
Mm-hmm.
And if you
Yeah.
want them to change it, you have to be able to change it. You also have to figure out what that process looks like.
Okay. I'm gonna think about that.
Yeah.
Because I mean, all of those communities have a board of civil authority
Yeah.
and it's like, it is a GovOps question, but
If they won't voluntarily, they do it themselves. That's why we have different configurations around the state. If we do it, there's another element of contribution.
And you can charter differently. I mean, that is what a charter is. It's a special grant of privileges or powers from the legislature. So if you're individually chartering new school district municipalities, the representation model can be different in all of them. You would have to figure that out.
could we ask the school boards of the forming districts to be the group that starts it?
You would, depending on how large your new school districts are, could have school boards of 75 people, right? That seems untenable to me. I think there are different ways you can look at it. And I'd be happy to talk offline and involve my GovOps colleagues in that conversation. But I just wanted to highlight that there is a big difference between the legislature chartering and creating municipalities and the Chapter 11 process of voluntary formation of union school districts. And so what Act 46 did when the state board issued its order merging school districts is it kind of had a default school board set up first. And that was the chair and the clerk of each school board from the forming districts. But again, you're looking at just a handful of communities. That's a workable amount of people. If it's, if you're going along the lines of 5 school districts or even 20 school districts, the number of people is going to be a lot bigger.
Could the chair designate someone anyway if they didn't want to be the one to do it?
I don't remember what the language was.
So you could just designate someone from each school board.
Yes, in fact, if there's no elections, school board members are appointed by some process, then you're not triggering a constitutional analysis at all.
Okay.
Constitutional analysis is only triggered for an election.
Yes.
I'm confused. I'm looking at the alternative merger proposal section on page going into 19, line 6. I think I know what that means, but I mean, in statute, what does delivered at a cost of parents, voters, and taxpayers value? Because it seems like a pretty subjective sentence.
I don't think I understand what you mean by in statute. It's succession law.
Okay.
So you're, sorry.
No, actually, please continue.
I will confess, I thought the same.
Yeah.
I thought about the same thing, and the other way to put it is, can't afford things. And let's get one for the house.
Yes.
That this is added value, but values was I thought.
This on page 19, 19 lines 1 through 6 are taken directly from Act 46.
Oh, okay.
Well,
Okay.
then we can definitely change. I feel like you're channeling Dick Sears.
Yeah.
Who would just hate any flowery session law language that we don't really stand by.
Yeah. Well, I think I was.
You should. You should.
It's all policy. What you want this alternative merger proposal to result in is all a policy choice for you all.
Is there any piece in this that provides some sort of analysis about cost and whether or not, whether these changes will save money or more money is going to be spent, how it will impact the proposed district? Because I haven't seen that in this except in line 6, which we just discussed.
I made the same note.
Is that anywhere in there, or am I missing it, or
So what exactly is the question?
cost efficiency? I mean, the whole purpose of this exercise is to address cost in part. That's part of it. I'm not seeing how that's being addressed in any sort of accountability piece or some sort of retrospective study as to whether or not these districts, proposed new districts, are going to work, or if they're implemented, if there's if they are working, if they're implemented. I don't know if I'm articulating this very well, but cost analysis, yeah.
I agree. I mean, there's a lot, like, from the beginning, it says enact legislation that creates a school district consolidation process. I remain convinced that there are some districts that don't need to be consolidated at this time. So if they're gonna save money, great, or add more opportunity for kids, but I wouldn't want language that presupposes that we automatically get savings out of consolidation.
Yeah, we haven't put numbers in here for size.
Right.
And so there was an assumption that before through the session that there's some level of efficiency gain with larger districts to a point, but we haven't said.
Mhm.
Back to the mapping issue, as we go through this process, identifying things that we only need to do for the process. Is there a fund side or a budget line? That, or can we put it on our ask for the budget? If we knew how much it would cost to create these maps.
Well, we have is the per diems for the members, and then we have $50,000 in here for the support for the site, the work over the summer.
And that doesn't need to pay for GIS. They work at our.
That would be a question for them.
Okay. So that, I mean, if that all went to the map making, I still think we would need some money for a public process. To like feed people and offer childcare for them to come tell us, whoever the unlucky people are screwed. You know, I think they need to have several public meetings that have amenities. So people can attend.
Yeah, that's not in there. There's something about the public process part, right?
Right, but there's no appropriation.
Yeah, beyond the members who would go to the meetings.
I don't know, it just says 50,000.
No, I'm sorry. You're right, that there's a public process. And what there is to fund it is the per diem for the members because they drive on the state.
Right.
But you're suggesting you'd like to keep that up.
Yeah, I am.
We don't know.
To,
Well, we don't know, but like I went to a school meeting because they offered childcare. I mean, that's the only reason I could go with the legislator. So, you know, I would hope that we would set aside money so that each meeting could have food and childcare and, you know, gas cards if people are unable to come otherwise.
I think adding food is, well, that's a major component. I can see the child care.
I will,
Adding food makes it like, how we actually do that.
okay,
Yeah,
I'm not gonna die.
make
on
the
food bill,
note, make the note.
but- Okay,
Are there things we want to be thinking about and got Beth here, anything we want to have, or we want to have our
What we're gonna
more
do,
discussion,
John.
more discussion.
I don't think.
Mhm.
Okay.
I think we need to digest.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Just a procedural question for whether, so this task force, let's say goes into effect. They come up with a new map, they come and present it next year. And then it's rolled into a new bill where we decide how or if those districts consolidate, whether it's forced or voluntary or what the incentives are.
No, I think I think the thinking is that whether it's explicit enough or not, I don't know, but if the task force recommends a map, the legislature would vote it by January 31st. or not. And if not, then then B would go into effect where the second half of the work of the task force to develop an alternative process would go into effect if there's no map adopted by January 31st. So that would be the legislature making the map, setting the boundaries, and as made clear to us by charter and whatever. So we'd be chartering districts. And this is,
In other words, forcing them to merge.
yes, forcing it. Yeah. So that'll be the choice for the legislature. And then, frankly, the choice will be in part as people look at the way that the foundation formula will work, and then make their own decisions about whether the map reflects something that's actually going to get to something that's more efficient, or would they rather leave the districts the way they are.
So do you want us to funnel our changes through you?
Yeah.
Okay.
That'd be great. Yeah. And we have to definitely keep putting one foot very much in front of the other.
Yeah.
Because we have to listen.
Right. So I mean, I made all my notes. I don't know. Like, how do you want?
I'm happy to either sit with you afterwards, or if you can, if they're clear enough that I can actually read them.
Mm-hmm. I think so. Yeah. I mean, but I'll sit with you and
Yeah. Okay.
not today. If it doesn't, it's whatever.
Yeah, we have to really keep moving.
Yeah.
So it's, so anything else?
Yeah, sorry, I'm confused
No, it's okay.
about now the committee process. So you want us to propose changes individually to you, or are we going to be having a committee markup discussion going through each section where we put out our proposals?
Well, that's
concerns.
a fair question.
Okay.
We could do it either way. If you want to show them to me, it would be quite expedite things a little bit, but I think we're going to have to do section by section markup in any event. So are we in the need to digest mode on this at this point, or any more questions? Anything else you're wondering about at this point? It's okay, actually, if you do.
Digest.
Okay. So, but be ready to come back to this tomorrow with that. We can get you back up as soon as we can get it off the board. Okay. Well,
Oh, I don't think we're starting. So we have the student testimony tomorrow, so we're not starting until week 15, I think.
well, then 3:15. We're gonna have to be here. We'll be here for a while. Yeah.
I think there's about 15 students signed up, so it might end earlier than 2 hours.
Okay.
I don't know, but that's
Get to lunch. Okay. So we can take a short break. Then we'll have JFO. What? And by the way, when I say short break, let's make it 4:20 because we want just a 5-minute break, and then back there ready to go. 4:20 for JFO and the chair.
Do you want to go off or just you?
Just move. Post and pass out the slide.
We're back. Oh, okay. Here you go.
Everybody, here are the slides that you're using. I haven't seen them. So we can go live. Oh, we are.
Yeah.
We're back. Okay. So we're back after a short break. Senate Education Committee on April 24th. Yesterday we had, I think we'll call it a level set on how a foundation formula works, or the factors that come in. What happens if you squeeze here and comes out later. And so, but JFO has been doing some modeling for us, because we have to recall that we have the old weights that were passed in 22 that were related to taxing capacity. And so we have done some modeling looking at those weights sort of transferred onto becoming a allocation as opposed to tax capacity, but also then looked at the weights that Tammy Colby had put in. I looked at some various versions with because there's a lot of assumptions and everything. So we just did enough to get a committee discussion started here and to give the committee a sense of what the choices in front of us are and how. And so I want to do that setup. This is really the idea here is to get a good committee discussion going. But I also want to acknowledge that that I just made that sound like pretty easy.
Oh,
There's a lot of work that's gone into this to get us to the point that we actually have something to look at today. I just want to acknowledge that as required within the last 2 minutes in the way. So we have the slides in front of us. We can work on as we go. And this is, the weights are now no longer having to do with taxing capacity, they have to do with allocation, purely policy decisions at this point. So it's policy committee work, can look at weights. So yes.
All right, for the record, and I've been in this committee maybe once, but it has been several months. Ezra Holden, Joint Fiscal Office. And so if it's okay with the chair, I will share my screen.
Yes.
There we go. All right, so as the chair said, I am here to talk about some modeling of alternative foundation formulas. And so today I'm going to focus on the modeling request to use the weights provided by Dr. Colby and Baker, and then applying those in a few different scenarios. So first, start off, Joint Fiscal Office, nonpartisan, not good offer considerations. I think you all are familiar with this slide by now, but always got to start off with this, make sure we all know I'm nonpartisan. All right, so just a kind of level set here, a few facts and terms that everyone should get familiar with or be already familiar with, and because we're going to be using them throughout this presentation. So in fiscal year 2025, the education payment was $1.88 billion.
So actually, one thing I should have done to set up this, because you've triggered the thought. As we put these weights together, and this is an assumption, the committee, the committee has to think of. We've done it with the assumption that we want to hold spending after the multiplier to this year's level of 1.88 billion. And the assumption would be, just to play it out, and after we'll get all this, but if we are talking about the foundation when we're going into effect in July 1, 27, it would be the 1.88 billion times the multiplier once, times the multiplier a second time, and by the time it hits in 27. but it's been a fair amount of work, I think, to squeeze everything down and keep it within the 1.88 billion, because as you recall, that the numbers that it came over the house were above that.
Right.
And we're so just wanted to say that that's an assumption built into what everything we're going to see today.
So it's still a theoretical exercise because this isn't money that's being distributed to anyone in fiscal year 25 or 26. It's saying we should use the actual amount from this year so that we don't build on dollars that never existed
Yes.
for the inflator.
Yeah.
And it's about $35 million different. Is that right?
Something like that. There's other factors, I think, that as a role.
Okay.
Yes, as passed by the House, I believe it's 1.9 billion.
Mhm.
And so 1.914, so it's about 35, 32, or
Okay.
in that range. But yes, also a term you'll see a lot throughout this presentation is the term long-term weighted average daily membership, or I'll typically say long-term weighted ADM to try and shorten it up a little bit. And so that is the weighted student count that for this modeling drives the funding to a district. So you have a count of a student, whether they fall into a particular category or not, being like a grade, or if they are economic disadvantage, English learner, the weight is applied to that count. And when you add up that weighted count with your standard count, you have your weighted average daily membership, and then your foundation base is applied to that count and the membership of your district. So this is just how this model, you can see the funds are moved to a district. So you'll see these letters a lot, just making sure we all remember what they stand for. So today's modeling has various weights to generate different base amounts under different formulas, but they all have the same goal of hitting that 1.88 billion. And then just a few abbreviations that you'll see that you may or may not be familiar with. FPL, federal poverty level. So those are your students experiencing the economic disadvantage. And then EL is the English learner students. So
Can I ask a question? Here, do we need to be thinking about the $77 million being used to buy the property tax staff as related to any of this? So the actual education payment is 1.88 billion. And then we're using $77 million to buy down the cost of that to Vermonters this year.
Right.
If we do it in the budget.
right, so this is just modeling to hit a set dollar amount, not has no relation to tax policy,
Right.
buying down tax rates, increasing tax rates. None of that is
Okay.
part of this exercise. This is just showing you if the goal is to spend 1.88 billion,
Yeah.
what are some different scenarios, different weights to drive that to different parts of the state, different student populations at different base amounts.
I just have my finance hat on, brain, and they have to figure out how to make up the yield amount for the next fiscal year if we buy down the rate this year. They have to figure out like the reserves and the way that rate might pop back up in a year or two, but that does not apply to the weighting formula.
Correct. For this exercise, where the money comes from is not
Okay.
considered. It's
Okay.
just, you have 1.88 billion.
Yep.
Spread it across the state
Okay.
to the schools. So. Okay, here we go. So first, I think it'd be helpful to start as H454 is passed by the House. This is the current foundation formula as it has been passed. And again, this is reflective of the weights and base from the April 3rd testimony of this year from Dr. Colby and Baker's memo. And their modeling does include small school weights applied to sparse districts. That is to take into account small by necessity, but not having that fully defined at this time. So that is a modeling choice that was that was made for there. We're just flagging that's in there. So as of right now, their work has a base of 15,033, and that would be per your weighted ADM. So this is the amount that, so I guess I'm kind of starting at the top, jumping down to this bottom section here, and then filling in the, so you have 15,033 at the top. And when you multiply that against your long-term weighted ADM at the bottom, at 127,404, which is generated by your student weights, that's where you get the total funding generated of 1.914 billion. But as I'm sure you're all aware, there are about 83,000 students in Vermont, not 127. So where does that difference come from? Well, that comes from these weights that you see. So FPL, you see, has a weight next to it of 1.02. So what that means is these are additive weights. So a student that was experiencing economic disadvantage, their FPL, they would get an additional 1.02. So it would be one student plus 1.02. So effectively 2.02 for weighting. So the same thing applies for EL. One student who's a EL student would receive 1.39 on top of the standard one that every student receives in this formula. So you effectively have 2.39 when you combine your big major one. So you'll see that grades 6 through 8 and 9 through 12 have zeros next to them. They are not weighted in this formula. Current law, taxing capacity weights, they do have a weight, but for this, they were not weighted. The research didn't deem that it was a statistical necessity to weight them for outcomes. You'll see that small schools of under 100 students has a weight of 0.21, and that would apply to every student at a school of fewer than 100. But remember that point I brought up earlier about small by necessity. So for those students in that small school to get that weight, they have to be in a sparse district. And when I say sparse, I'm talking about, you'll see sparsity of less than 36 people per square mile and fewer than 55 people square mile. The highest tier of sparsity was not weighted for the Colby and Baker formula. So that's a 0 now. So if you are in that range of 55 to 100, you don't get a weight. You're just the standard student. So you would need to be in one of those two weighted sparsity categories and at a small school to get those weights.
Is it, has any analysis been done on whether sparsity has led to small schools? Like, we have two different factors here, but in the end, small by necessity may be derived from sparsity, but could be some other factors. I'm wondering why there's two factors that lead to small by necessity.
So I have not done that analysis. The weights are from the research done by Dr. Colby and Baker. So I have not done the analysis about why there are different weights.
Okay. Those came at 22. You raised the question yesterday because one of the realities is that a lot of students in sparse districts are going to large schools. So you'll see something here. So there's a lot of other scenarios here, one of which takes that into account.
And I think, I mean, from what I remember that Tammy said, sparsity has its own costs because you're pulling in kids from a larger geographic area, more transportation, etc. And being in a sparse area and going to a small school has its own overhead that's higher. So I think there's just two different cost factors related to what it means to be in a sparse area, and then again, what it means to be in a small school in a sparse area.
Okay, motion.
Yeah, so this is what you have as passed by the House in H 454. And again, when you are multiplying that base of the 15,033 through all of those weighted pupil counts to which add up to that 127,404, that's where the total of 1.9 billion comes from, that additional, roughly 34 million versus the 2025 education payment. So that's what you have passed right now. So I think that's a
Before you jump off that slide, I'm curious if any look was done at the comparability between FPL and EL with the current weights. I know they're used for different applications, but how similar are they in the end?
So we weren't able to find a good way to correlate the two because they really are trying to do two very different things. So with taxing capacity, the idea is, you're allowing for additional spending, but it is not a requirement of additional spending versus this foundation formula. It is driving a set number of dollars to a place, but it doesn't dictate, how they're spent. So for example, if you are at FPL, you're getting the 15,033 plus that extra of 1.02. Regardless of, your spending decisions, if you have that student, you're just giving that money. Taxing capacity was more about spend and related to the yield model.
Yeah, couldn't it be derived that taxing capacity was theoretically intended to improve the educational quality to supplement students with lower federal poverty index levels? I mean, there's got to be some correlation we can make there that this is a good transition from where we are now to as passed in H 454. Anything to?
So again, even if the intent is to have, to support students who are experiencing different circumstances or experiencing, economic disadvantage, FPL, the fact that they are operating in different, really two different systems makes it difficult to draw a direct line between those two weights. 2.49 as a taxing capacity weight is very different from 2.49 as a foundation formula weight, because a 2.49 foundation formula weight could be indicating you get your base plus almost 2.5 as well on top of that. So it's just not quite the same when you just plug and play with one over the other.
Okay. So what I'm seeing, having read ahead, that no one's questioning FPL or EL costs, that those factors are solid. Is there anybody that needs to weigh in on? It's kind of a rhetorical question, but we're all, the four scenarios all accept those factors as.
We're looking at I think you're looking at something different than we are. We have a new,
Yeah, I'm just.
okay.
I'm just using, we're all four are lined up, but they're all four are using
So I
the
think,
same factors.
No, you see the different, I think.
so just to clarify, it was a modeling request for me to retain the same weights, as presented, as passed by H 454.
I get that. What I'm saying is, has anybody questioned that? Is it accurate? Is it appropriate? Is it necessary? Because we're all about to launch off the cliff here, and I just want to know if that's anybody's.
If I may, I mean, that's a policy choice, right? This is all.
Okay. So you can say JFO is not analyze that.
It's not JFO's position as right now to question or analyze these weights, but we can perform modeling with a given set of circumstances, and the exact set that I was given for this assignment are the weights you see in front of you. If they were a different set of weights, then analysis with very exact exact specifications.
It could be a rephrase question there. If not JFO, who?
Us.
You're
Us
saying,
as legislators, we analyze that 1.02 FPL is the appropriate. I mean, I'm not qualified to do that. And I'm not qualified to say that 1.39 is the English language factor, appropriate factor. I'm just wondering if,
I don't remember what AOE had, but nobody's questioned a high multiplier for those.
that's all I'm trying to do. If everyone's okay, then we move, but I'm just wondering if, moment in time, these factors, somebody, 3 years from now is gonna say, what are you guys thinking? I just want to make sure if we understand that we accept that factor, it's a pretty significant driver in the whole formula.
That is absolutely true.
Yeah.
In fact, that each factor has a real impact.
Okay.
I think there's a couple other questions for later consideration. One, how often do we look at the weights? So we don't create big dislocations, but we still look and assess, what's needed. And then what I appreciate about the English language learner weight is that you can have a really small district that has like 5 English learners, and you need a pretty generous formula for them to even have access to anything. If you just have the taxing capacity, it's really hard to have a full-time anybody, well instructed.
Okay, so now that we've kind of seen what has been passed by the House in H 454 with base and weights, thought we would just go ahead and go through an overview of the modeling that we were tasked with, JFO was tasked with for this presentation. So some underlying assumptions that have gone into this modeling. So the modeling uses fiscal year 2025 data and the Vermont School Boards Association, or VSBA, regions as a proxy for a district construction. That's not to say that that's what there will be in the future, but it's a proxy for smaller, or not smaller, but fewer schools consolidated into larger, or I guess I should say fewer districts consolidated into the 11 VSBA regions. And so the models were also built to hold the education spending level at that 1.88 billion education payment. And the weights are also directing a certain portion of the designated base and not a targeted dollar amount. So these weights are just targeting a proportion of the base, and the base is changing to fit that 1.88 billion. So rather than creating a weight to drive a certain number of dollars, like you want X number of dollars, so you will create a weight to do that. What was done here is just the portion of that weight to a base is set, not the targeted number of dollars. So that's something to keep in mind, because as the base changes, the amount that those weights are generating will also change, because they're based in this model directly on the base. And all of these weights here are added. So there are 3 different scenarios that I've modeled here for you all today. So they are going to apply different bases and weights that could be included in a foundation formula, not advocating for any of them.
Well, in fact, you did what I asked you to do.
Yes.
So just put on that.
Yes, and overall costs. We're just gonna keep reiterating that target of 1.88 billion level spend, just so to keep side of that. So the 3 scenarios, and I thought it'd be easier to just call them A, B1, and B2 instead of having to read through the entire list every single time someone is looking to discuss one of the scenarios. But I will read through the scenarios full length right now, and then going forward, unless it is confusing, my intention was to refer to them as scenarios A, B1, and B2. But if that too many different scenarios, I'm happy to just use the full name, whatever works best.
And so scenario A is what was the House version pushed down to meet the 1.88 billion.
Yes. So yes, scenario
Main
A.
assumptions and weights in this.
Yes, exactly. All of the weights from the prior slide are maintained. However, we were tasked with lowering the total payment from that 1.914 billion to 1.88 billion. The second scenario B1 is,
Well, actually, before you go, just make sure people have their arms around this.
Oh.
So you'll see that the pushing it down for the 1.88 billion, leaving the weights the same, has the effect of lowering the base by about $300. Just make sure people see that. Okay.
yes, and so scenario B1 is the same H454 weights being constrained down to current education payment. However, I was then tasked with adding pupil grade weights. And so if you are a student within grade 6 through 8, you would receive a 0.08 additional weight. And
Can I ask I just want to remind myself. Doctors Colby and Baker came up with the weights. Did they also come up with the 15,033 as an adequacy?
Yes.
This was theirs too.
Yeah.
yes, and so grades 9 through 12 would receive then a 0.12 weight. And then finally, you have scenario B.
So before you move on, just to make sure people, the difference in B1 is it adds in the weights for middle and high school. And the weights came from actual spending.
Okay.
So the 12%, and 912 is actual spending after bill back at the end of last year. So that's a number grounded in reality.
Does this, I don't even know what I'm asking, but does this subtract out special education and CTE?
So part of this was to keep, if it was a categorical aid, to keep it as categorical aid. So the census block grant is not included here. That exists outside of the education payment of 1.88 billion.
Okay.
But any special education expenditures not captured in that census block grant that is within the education payment would show up here.
Okay.
So, yeah, so anything that fell inside of the education payment and not covered by flexible pathways, a transportation categorical aid, any of those is within that 1.88 billion. But there is no special education weight being talked about here. And so the final scenario on my list here is scenario B2. It is the same as the scenario above it. You have your H454 weights with student grade weights. And the new part here is that you have restricted the sparsity. So instead of it being students in a school in a region where you have between 36 and 55 people per square mile in that region, it's now only less than 36 people per square mile in a region would get the sparsity weight. However, if you would have been eligible for a small school weight in that 36 to 55, you still receive one here. So this reduces the weighting from sparsity, but maintains the small schools. So no small school weighting was removed by this, but you do remove that sparsity of 36 to 55. And so those are the differences between the three scenarios. So,
and you'll just to make sure people see it, that has an effect on the base of going back up from B1. It goes up from 14, a little bit less than 14.3 to a little bit more than 14.6 in B2.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful reminder. Since the task of this modeling was to keep spending level at 1.88, the base and the weights and the weights aren't changing. 1.02 per FPL is staying 1.02 FPL. That means that the base is having to adjust if you change another factor because total spending can't go up in this construction. So if you add in a weighting category, the base then has to go down because if you think of it, weighting is giving extra dollars to a student. But since you have one pot of money, that dollar has to come from somewhere. And so the base is acting and then as that lever. And so when you do the opposite, when you remove a weight such as sparsity, the base therefore increases because fewer dollars are being allocated, so to speak, to that weight. And so I think that that's a really good point that the chair made.
And we had already established that transportation was not factored into anything yet. It's still a
So the
question mark or block.
so the portion of transportation that the schools pay is in their education payment. So it's half. So the schools
okay.
schools have half, and then the education, excuse me, not the education, the census block grant for transportation is intended to reimburse the half of the expenses for the district, but that first half would be included in the education payment. Yeah, that's a really helpful distinction. Yeah, so first we have scenario A here, which is again, Colby and Baker, the H454 weighted proportions of 1.02, 1.39, etc. But we cannot spend more than 1.88 billion. And so you'll see that base has shrunk down from 15,033 to 14,762. But you'll notice that all of all those weights have stayed the same, but the dollars that they generate is then going to be less because they're being applied against a base that's less. And this still has small schools, small by necessity. So to get a small school weight, you have to do sparse district. And so you see down there, I had pointed out earlier, you have your long-term weighted ADM. So since none of the weights have changed, that number is still the same because the weights are still the same, but the dollars that are being multiplied against that number, that's what's changing. And that's why your total funding generated has gone down because the base is acting as your mover here, your lever here, and not the weights themselves. So that's just what the base would look like if you had to constrain the H454 weights. And later on in this presentation, we'll take a look at the dollar and percentage impact to the VSBA district. So this is kind of just to see what mechanisms are going on to drive the dollars to those regions. So here, scenario B1, we have the same weights as scenario A, except that you have the addition of grade weight. So if you are pupil grade 6 through 8, you're getting an extra 0.08 of the base. If your grades 9 through 12, you're getting an extra 0.12. And so you see that base number has come down because you are allocating more dollars to different, putting boxes essentially. You have only 1.88 of something. So the more boxes you have, you have to take it from somewhere. And so the base is where you're taking it from in this situation. But you can see that the total long-term weighted ADM has increased at the bottom. And that's because you have more weighting categories. So every secondary student is being multiplied by that 0.12 added on top. So that's why you have more of the weighted ADM, but the dollars haven't changed because the base has gone down. And so you're still spending the same, but where those dollars are going has changed through the new weights. And finally, scenario B2. So again, we're maintaining everything from scenario B1. So you have your grade weights still and your H454 weights. However, we've removed sparsity for that mid-tier of sparsity, 36 to 55 people per square mile. You'll notice that that's now 0. And so you'll see the base has now increased because those dollars that were being reserved for the students in that mid-tier of sparsity have been effectively released back into the system. And so that means that they're going into the base And additional dollars are then being channeled to all of the other weighting categories because the weight is being applied against the base. So if your base is now higher due to the elimination of a weight, every other weight, the dollar amount would increase because they have a larger base. And
I think you have a typo though.
Oh.
This now restricts the sparsity weight only to 36 people or fewer per square mile.
Okay, yeah, so no, so I'm glad you pointed that out. So I mentioned it briefly at the beginning when I did the quick run through. So it's restricting sparsity eligibility, but the sub bullet here is the idea was to keep giving the small school weight to schools in that
Ah.
sparsity. So this is telling you that the small school weight still applies to you if you are in an area with fewer than 55.
I like that.
So if you are in, because, yeah, so if you fall into either of these two sparsity tiers, it's just easier to say fewer than 55.
Yeah.
Yes, but no, that's a great
No, I'm
catch
glad,
there.
but that's great. I actually really like it.
The issue, frankly, Senator Weeks picked up on yesterday, which is, are we doubled it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but still wanted to maintain a category for the purpose of determining small school rates.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. So, and now you have, I think that table that, folks had jumped ahead to. This is that one that was being referenced, a summary of all of the individual tables put together here to one large table. And so you can look across and see how really from scenario A through B2, you are dealing with the same number of dollars, but you're seeing how that base amount has gone up or down as weighting categories are introduced, like in scenario B1, or they're removed as in scenario B2, and how the base is responding to that even as your total dollars generated stays the same. And so this is an interesting table to look at and think about, okay, so that you've got a base, but this doesn't tell you where those dollars are going. So now we're going to take a look at where those dollars are going and how each scenario can change where dollars are going due to different characteristics of students in different parts of the state. So, and again, for this modeling, the VSBA district construct was the one that was chosen. If a different construct was used, then the analysis you would have to change it because, for example, sparsity is a district's borders. So we're using the VSBA districts to determine sparsity. So if you had a different construct, you have different district lines, and therefore the sparsity within that district would change because you're now looking at a different geographic area. So that's just at least one change to point to be thinking of as districts change that you would have to reanalyze here. And so,
Can I ask, is just so I'm aware, is the 36 and the 55, are those all like census based ranges? Is that why we use those very specific numbers? Or we could just say under 40 people, or like, where did those definitions come from?
so those are the ranges set in current law. And so the pupil weighting study of 2019, which helps, which Dr. I believe Colby was involved with as well, those came from there. Those are how they are set in current law.
Okay.
So yes, that is current law sparsity ranges.
Okay. So we'd probably keep them because we already know them, but if we,
That's
We don't know
policy, that's a
exactly.
policy decision, but if they were changed, the base and weights could change too, because you're now putting people into different ranges and yes. So that's just something to be aware of, if things are changed, if one thing changes, the whole construct would have to be re-examined to see if that change goes throughout the whole system. So your your VSBA regions would divide the state into 11 districts. And so you can see those up on the map there, excuse me.
So clearly, just like we talked about yesterday, these are just proxies because they don't exist for any education purposes.
Yes,
So they're just proxies.
purely hypothetical. It's just a good proxy for the notion of fewer but larger school districts. And so, again, this analysis that I'm going to show you all, just want to reiterate that this estimates the amount of funding for those VSBA regions. You would have to look at different, the scenario would change if the construct was changed. And then as a reminder, those three scenarios that we just looked at are H54 as passed by the House, scenario A, which is H454 shrunk down, scenario B1, which is the shrunken H454 weights with pupil grade weights, and then scenario B2 is scenario B1, so shrunk down H454 with pupil grade weights, but the elimination of one tier of sparsity and leaving only the sparsest available.
If I could, I'm still struggling with small schools and sparsity, but specific to small school factor. It says criteria, small school, less than 100 students. But we're looking at VSBA boundaries. How do we determine if the particular district should be calculated with a small school factor? Because it's a large area. And I would assume that probably all these large districts have a small school of one type or another. How do we, because these small schools are onesie twosies, they're not whole districts. How do we kind of come to grips with that?
Sure. And so, so that is something to certainly be cognizant of when you're creating, if you're creating new districts, because as it is in written right now, current law, it's district boundary. So if you draw one large VSBA district, even if you have a huge population center in one corner, but the rest of that district is sparse, if there is one small school in that big population area, they would be considered a sparse and small school because
the district enjoys the benefit of the factor of the small school.
The current for sparsity, yes, as the current law is written. For the small school, it would only be students going to that small school in the sparse area. But if the district boundaries were drawn large enough, if you had a small school in the middle of a town, but you drew the district boundaries large enough to get in that threshold, it would receive that sparsity, even if it's in a town as it is in current law.
So hypothetically, if you've got a big district that's got, let's just say it's somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 or something to that effect, but we're really trying to recognize the fact that there's a small school there, less than 100 kids. It just kind of seems to skew the whole issue. We really want to recognize that small school, and if necessary, support it so it doesn't, get penalized. We actually recognize and reward it, not kill it. I'm not sure these two factors work well enough together to really, and I'm not criticizing anybody. I just, once we launch off the cliff, we're all trying to fly. And I'm wondering if, again, this is not something in JFL, this is something you're kind of digesting and interpreting from Kobe's work. I'm just wondering, I think we may need to call her back in and kind of like understand the concept that she used to derive these larger factors.
So the only thing I will add on to that is, if you look at scenario B2 with the elimination of one tier of sparsity, you actually would be able to drive more dollars to small schools because there's now that portion of the pie has been released to the whole, increasing your base, which means that therefore the small school weight actually drives more dollar term. So just if you think about a fixed pot of money, and Dr. Colby's original work was not built to hit 1.88 billion, so it's not the same in comparison with that. But when you're comparing these three scenarios, A, B, and C, A, B1, and B2, you'll see that if you remove, for example, in this request, sparsity, you are actually driving more dollars to those small schools. it versus scenario B1.
And more to the base.
Yes, more to the base, more to every student in the state who receives the base. If you were in that sparse district that has lost that weight, you've now lost that weight, however, but the rest of the system is getting a higher base and their weights are worth more now. So that's just something to call out as a way to, in this case, drive dollars to different areas. By this weight being eliminated, there's now more available for the small school weights.
It's why I like to see whenever realistic, the actual breakdown of how this would impact current school districts. Because, I mean, if you look at Chittenden County, Winooski alone, that's all the ELL students plus, you know, a chunk of Burlington. That's a very big swing. If they are their own district, if they're half of Chittenden County, if they all get cut off, it's just, these all look very different when you get down to the level of the existing districts we have. Hence the notion of what is fair and how do you draw maps so that you smooth this out, but without losing the dollars going to the students who need it the most. If all of Chittenden County was one district, I couldn't guarantee that the English learners would get the same attention and support that they're receiving.
Yeah, what you're really saying also what Julia said yesterday, was that just yesterday? Oh my God. That where those lines are matters.
It does.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Senator Hershey,
So just to confirm, in these analyses, H 454 as passed by the House, the formula is being applied to the VSBA regions.
Yes, for this now, yes, what you are seeing there, yes.
When they were, and I see that it's actually, but so when they were doing their analysis, what hypothetical maps were they applying their foundation formula to?
You know, I think I can't recall at this moment which construct they were looking at. It's been a few different constructs that kind of.
I mean, because the thing that I'm wondering, because I see that we're applying it to, you know, these different. Sorry, did you want to say something?
I'll just respectfully, Senator, can I phone?
Yeah.
She may recall which map. I have a few too many maps, which.
Yeah, so Julia Richter, JFO, the vast bulk of the modeling that we presented to the House was the VSBA regions. So at request of the committee.
And this little district.
Dr. Colby's was the question with Dr. Colby's foundation, was that modeled using VSBA?
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood the question. No, Dr. Colby and Baker's analysis is looking at current law, Vermont, current law governance. So the memo corresponds with Vermont's educational landscape. This is really that difference between the cost factor model that Doctors Colby and Baker use versus the evidence-based approach from the administration that is looking at not our current educational landscape, but a different educational landscape. The other piece that Ezra has mentioned that I will mention again in this context is that what we're looking at in these scenarios that Ezra has done are not reflective of the House, because the House passed version has the base that corresponds with Dr. Colby's weights, right? Weights are proportion to the base. The House passed version has those tiered EL weights.
Okay, so
They're not reflected here, and the House passed version also has special education weights, which are also not included. All of which Ezra's mentioned, but I just think it's helpful to continue that.
I thought I asked. Okay, so I asked, like, there's six EL tiers plus this life or whatever. So there's seven possibilities for how you cut the EL formula. Did we want to do that? I thought
So the Colby and Baker memo offered the option of a single EL here, and that's the one that's presented here due to suppression of EL. It was not data. It's not, at this time, we're not able to apply all those tiers,
Oh.
because if you only have 2 students in the school, we can't,
Yeah,
we don't know, they can't tell us how many students there are because
okay.
to identify them. So so to get around that data
Mhm.
constraint, we used the single weight option from
Okay.
their memo, which is the 1.39,
Okay.
applied just to EL student counts regardless of their proficiency level.
Okay,
And one of the asks for this analysis was to not consider the special education weight.
okay,
So that's why it's not on here, but yes, the H454 offered either a tiered special education weight or a flat special education weight. But the request for this analysis was to not have special education as a weight, to maintain the categorical aid that exists
Okay.
separate from this education payments.
okay. So we just have a policy choice when we
Absolutely.
decide about if we're gonna maintain those sensitive little weights for different types of special education categories and this life.
My follow-up, I'm kind of grappling with, I mean, these are helpful, but for the committee, I guess I'm grappling with the fact that we don't know what map is going to be made by this task force. I mean, they could come back and say 75 districts is a good number compared to the 11 that we're looking at now. And the conversation about sparsity, it reminded me that, but the more these maps change, the more this modeling will change. So, I mean, this is still very helpful, but it's difficult to figure out how to move forward with the underlying bill itself without knowing how many districts we'll end up with. So I don't have a question. It's just a challenge.
I think the only way to sort of even just mentally assess, okay, we have, like we are applying this to an existing world, is to look at how this would impact current districts and just kind of know your area well enough to know, oh, I would worry that this area is too property rich and this, this area is losing out because X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, because it is the case that if we start this on July 27th, we're going to be operating the yard floods unless there's a voluntary closures on the existing contract for the first period of time.
Well, the 119 districts. So we should also get an analysis of the 119. Oh, okay.
I guess what's confusing me is I keep looking at as past the house. And I see 1.39 for English language. Wouldn't that not be accurate? Like if they did put in the 6 and the SLIFE, then wouldn't it average out to like a different weight amount for their bottom line number?
So I would assume that's a question for Tammy.
Yeah, so I
Okay.
mean,
She has 6 levels of English language proficiency. All we know how many English language proficiency students are in the state. From those 6 factors, we should be able. I assume that's how she got the average number. This average.
About the average number.
so I can't speak if that's the average number, but 1.39 is the alternative offered by Dr. Colby in the same memo. So in the memo, it was offered that you could do a tier or you could do 1.39. So it came from the same author and the same analysis at the same time. So as to how it's an average or not, I would suggest you ask Dr. Baker that.
Okay, but this table uses 1.39 and arrives at a total funding amount of, 1.92 billion. Is that accurate, or did the House never get the modeling on the more fine-tuned?
Well, I think what Ezra was saying is that that same memo said, or you can use 1.39.
But I thought they didn't
Because
use
it's
1.39.
They did, but the memo said you could. So that's what we plugged in here from. But Julia, you've been to say something.
Yeah, so couple of things here. Yes, it is correct. The 1.39 EL weight that is included here in the as passed is not reflective of the House passed EL tiered weights.
Okay.
That is because the data that has been provided by AOE to JFO is suppressed, which it should be suppressed until we have a data agreement, right? Data is suppressed when there's a vulnerable population that's a non-zero count up to 11. So because Vermont is such a small state,
Yeah.
and we have so few EL students in certain school districts, the vast bulk of the data is suppressed.
Right.
So as a proxy here, the alternative flat weight of 1.39 was used because we didn't have the data to do the tiered weight modeling.
But did that yield the 1.9?
Yeah. So
Five.
the modeling that you're looking at here,
Yeah.
consistent with the modeling that was presented in the House, it's using the flat weight of
Okay.
1.39 until AOE and JFO can reach a data sharing agreement where we can have access to the unsuppressed data, which is where we're not at yet.
Okay.
The 1.39 is not an average of the tiered weights.
The highest.
It is not the highest.
Okay.
What it is it's reflective of
Oh.
if you were to not have a tiered weight and you were to have a single flat weight, the dollar amount that would need to be assigned to EL students, right? So weights as presented in Colby's memo are reflections of the dollars that certain students should receive. It's a ratio. It's the Colby base is 15,033. And then each of these weights is essentially the way that the EL weights were derived at were from the EL report that JFO commissioned to Dr. Colby, or the legislature did a couple of years ago. It was published last year and essentially said within these different categories, these are the different cost adjustments necessary for EL students. It's then a ratio calculation of this is how many dollars a student should receive if they fit into this proficiency level. This is the recommended base from Colby. The ratio between these dollars and the base of 15,033 is 1.39. Okay. So that's what we're seeing here in terms of the EL weight. So perhaps we should have included a note outlining that this is not directly reflective. That's solely because of data availability. The other piece you're picking up on is the not inclusion of special education.
That's my other yeah.
Also because of data suppression.
But is the total of 1.9 is the bottom line total inclusive of special education?
No. So special education has been completely set aside for the purpose of this analysis.
In all scenarios.
Correct. Because of data suppression.
Because isn't it also true that the funding's derived from primarily federal funding? And how can it not be reflected in total cost of education without?
So a piece of clarification here, we're not looking at total cost. What we're looking at here are essentially the arithmetic of different bases and weights. So as Ezra outlined, the scenarios A, B1, and B2, he's performed that modeling to reach a 1.88 billion, which is the same amount of FY25 education payment. That education payment is not the total state dollars spent on education, it's the sum of all education spending. So if we were to pull up the education fund outlook that JFO publishes, you'd see that ed payment of 1.88 billion in FY 25 plus the 200 odd for the special ed census block grant, the amount for flexible pathways, universal school meals, teacher pensions, OPEB, flexible pathways. There's a whole host of other education costs that are not included in the 1.88 billion. And we're also not talking here at all about federal monies. We're solely talking about state dollars. So there are federal monies for special education, but there are also state monies for special education.
Can I just back up a sec to Dr. Colby's analysis? Can we assume that back 2 years ago or whenever it was that she did the formal analysis for the state, that she actually did have access to what's now considered privileged, what is considered privileged information on
I
students, number of students, cost for programs?
would assume so. I can't speak to that. That would be a question for Dr. Colby. It's but also saying it's, and this is a similar conversation I think we had a couple of weeks ago. It's not that the data is permanently privileged forever. It's that there are legal protections for certain students. This is way outside my bailiwick about data suppression.
That's not a question. Just want to make sure that the analysis we're dealing with is analysis that had all the granularity necessary to come up with appropriate factors.
Yeah, so I would refer to the pupil weighting report that Ezra mentioned and that I forwarded to Will earlier today. He reminded me that I promised that. So that is like, I don't know if it's 100, it's a lot of pages of methodology. So that would be a starting place. If there's specific questions about Dr. Colby and Baker's analysis, those questions should be referred to Dr. Colby and Dr. Baker.
And if I could, can you give us just again 40,000 feet? What are the programs which are not included? You said special ed, pathways, just to make sure that, you know, when we go back and look at this a couple days from now, that we really do understand what we're not seeing here.
Yeah, so any categorical aid is not in here. So that's your categorical aid for transportation, the categorical aid for the special education census block grant, flexible pathways, small school support grant is in there. I believe that there's a
Small school is in.
so there's the small school merger grant that is still in there, but that's separate from small school wage. I think it'd be more helpful to have, I don't have the sheet right here in front of me, but there are several.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm
Categorical.
sending it to Will right now.
Okay, I see.
so I have a question
Mhm.
for our, can I answer?
Yeah.
I have a question for our analysis purposes
Mhm.
as to, as we look at what we think are the right weights for, you know, making sure kids are fed and transported from different, you know, income levels or different size communities, is there value in trying to put more of these things into our bottom line and work backwards from there? Like, what would we keep having to have universal school meals as a line item, for example, if you have a generous FPL weight? Why would you then say, okay, well, that school's getting double the amount of money for kids in poverty, so that should be able to help them figure out universal school meals with more money? Like, throw it all together instead of saying like, oh, you're gonna set aside PCP money and USM money and small schools money and blah, blah, blah. I feel like then we've like defeated the purpose of the overall new weighting.
Yeah, I think that comes in risks, right?
Right.
Which is different. I think there's danger in trying to mix all this. And those are concepts, they operate differently. And so I think this is the part that, you know, when we talk about this school spending, this is what we talk about here. I don't know.
Well, but we don't actually. I mean, we know that property taxes went up because of the line item for school meals. It went up because the line item for PCB, so it's still pasted on top in the education finance system, and property taxes and sales taxes generally pay for them. So if we're being more generous, particularly for poverty, maybe we're not, I don't exactly remember the past calculation, but if we're being more generous for poverty, why would we go through all of this and then keep other things in line items without carefully looking at them for whether they should just be factored into the base?
Julie, my thoughts?
I think that this gets into the question of like the inherent question of building a foundation formula, right? The numbers in the bill, as it was passed by the House, were reflective of cost factor modeling, so an empirical exercise of determining the appropriate numbers to be included in the foundation formula.
But was that not thinking about like feeding kids?
It was excluding categorical aid
It
programs.
was excluding the program.
So universal school meals, for instance, is a categorical aid program that is not included in the cost factor analysis. As a policy choice that was made to supplement meal costs so that every student does not need to pay out of pocket for meals.
Right. And because we wanted to make it a funded mandate, we put it on top of everything rather than building it in because we were doing tax capacity. But if we are moving to a foundation formula, I feel like this is the time to say, do we need all these other things layered on top? Why would we do that?
It's obviously a question. I don't know the answer to that.
Like transportation could be built into sparsity. It's much. I don't know why we all.
So Julia,
I guess I just
Yeah.
one other piece, and I don't want to take over Ezra's testimony. He's the one in the witness here. The final thing that I would add to your question, Senator, about including certain costs in the base. Generally, a foundation formula does not include many of these costs that you're talking about in the base. They're categorical aid programs because they're for specific uses.
Oh, I see.
Universal school meals is a grant to supplement the difference between federal monies and what students are paying out of pocket.
The federal money is distributed based on how many free or reduced lunch eligible students you have in your school.
Correct.
So we could do the same thing.
I'm not sure.
So I see what you're saying, that when you give it as a block grant, you're saying you have to use every single dollar we give you here for food. But if you instead, we've had problems with unfunded mandates a lot because there's no way to capture that except saying your taxpayers will just have to pay it, including with the categorical aid. It's just paid differently.
Yes, I guess I would say that within the current construct of the education fund, I know that it depends on who you ask. From a state level fiscal perspective, there are no unfunded mandates because all school districts are funded through state dollars, right? So no school district is being forced to levy a local tax for a specific program. It's all statewide education.
Right. So property tax, let's just say for simplicity's sake, property taxpayers are still paying for universal school meals.
Correct.
They're just doing it to the state and then it's distributed as, how does it, I mean, wouldn't it be worth figuring out just how much money we'd be giving to every school district? Because we're probably giving the block grant based on how many kids they have, that how much they need to cover besides what's covered by the federal government.
It would be the same if the universal meals program were not to change. It would be the same cost. Because of making up the same difference. I guess how you choose to distribute dollars, that's a policy choice.
Okay, so let me just say for like mental exercise sake, that you took one of these formulas and you said, okay, universal school meals costs $18 million. Let's add that to the bottom line and then figure out the FPL weight that would get you that money incorporated into the foundation formula.
But so the FPL students are the ones that are currently receiving federal monies. So the students that the 18 million is covering the students above 185% of FPL.
So you could add it into the base.
And then if it were to be added into the base, to Ezra's point, it would be distributed through all of the monies.
Yeah, remember that we're talking about allocation here, not taxing.
Right. I still, someone can convince me of this after 6 p.m. tomorrow or something, but I see value in looking at all these line items we put on top of the education fund and saying, do those still need to be these separate block grants that we give out?
Yeah, I understand your point. Let's think. Okay.
Question that might play into this, maybe I'm out in left field on this, but can somebody refresh my memory on how the supplemental district spending reserve works for school construction? Is it, what are the where do the excess funds come from that go into that?
I have a proposal on that.
So can I phone a ledge council person here?
Can I ask if you guys want, I can talk about this if you want to talk about this, but do you are you trying to get through this? This is an entirely different topic.
Vigorous head shaking no. Maybe.
I'm sorry, Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. It is 5:37. I would highly recommend that you go over the supplemental district spending when you have language in front of you and you have a witness in front of you right now with this slide deck. And so I would encourage you to focus on this slide deck. And when there's language on supplemental district spending, we can go through that.
Okay, I was just wondering if there might have been a connection.
No, I think there is, but that'll come later.
I'll hold
I
my.
think I understand this now. I think I'm good on this slide.
Well, we're not, no, not yet. You're not.
Oh.
We haven't done it.
Oh, we have it.
We're still. Okay. Now, there's a whole other section here that we're just about to get to.
Yes, so maybe you were reading ahead.
Maybe.
Yeah,
Maybe.
I got bogged down in questions a bit, but yes, we would like chair for guys.
Yeah.
Okay, so I believe where we were when we left off is H 454 is passed by the House. If you were to use the VSBA construct, this is how those dollars are allocated to the different regions in that H 54 is passed by the House column. To the left of that, that is the current education payment dollar amount spent within those regions. The relative dollar change is in the column to the right of that. And then the percentage change is your far right column there. So this gives you a sense that even though at the bottom line, you're increasing overall spending by 1.8%, you can see that some districts like Bennington here would receive an extra 20% versus other districts. Wyndham is getting 1.6% just picking at random here, and then East Chittenden is losing 7.4%. So you can see that even though the total dollar amount has increased because of that weighting, and you're not talking about taxing capacity, districts can spend more because they have taxing capacity. You're now talking about giving districts monies. And so you can see how even though the total amount has gone up, you actually are having different, some districts are being brought up and some are going down because they can't spend as high as they were under taxing capacity, where they could spend more in their local budgets and make up the difference with their tax dollars. So you can see how this foundation formula is different from taxing capacity in that sense. You know, this is bringing up, it's not optional. Bennington under this construct would be given this extra $23 million as passed by the House construct here. Now, if you look at another scenario, the scenario A, which is the same weights, but you see the totals at the bottom are essentially the same. We could, if we were going out to pennies, we could get them the same, but I went with whole dollars because I figured that'd be best to just do with whole dollars and not write in pennies into statute or anything. You can see that even though it's a flat 0% increase overall, you are still seeing, because again, foundation formula, you are moving dollars into regions based on their weighting factors. And that is then going from other areas because again, they're just getting a weighted amount and not the amount that they choose to spend through their budget. So again, you can see that Bennington is getting an increase of 18.5. Others like Windham and Windsor are essentially flat, Central Vermont essentially flat, Kingdom South essentially flat. So, but then you have some areas like, again, we already did this one, Eastern Chittenden is down by 9% in this scenario. And just a refresher, these are the same weights as the H454 has passed. So your EL is 1.39, FPL 1.02 with all the small schools in sparsity, but no grade weights. So now if you move on to B1 where you're adding in the grade weights, you can see a little bit of a shift here. So you can see that Bennington is still getting that 18.5%, but Eastern Chittenden is now only down by 8%. And Kingdom North is getting an extra 9.4%. Kingdom South is getting 1.1%. You know, we can pick any one to look at. And so, but you see that overall, you still have the same relative largest increase and relative largest decrease. And that's because by and large, the grade distribution within a district is essentially the same. You don't see any wild swing. So by adding in grade weights, if there was one district that only had high school students, you could see a huge swing there. But since every district has essentially the same proportion within the district of pre-K through 12, you don't see any wild swings like that here. But again, I've added in weights here, which means that there are now fewer dollars available for some of the other categories like EL, like sparsity or small schools. So when you do change this, and you know, at the end, as I'm sure you all have discovered, there is a summary table where you can go and see how each of these is doing in each scenario. So you'll be able to find how some are doing better, some are doing worse in these scenarios. And that's one of the reasons, because you're taking the money away from some weights to add in those grade weights. But if we do the opposite here in scenario B2, the last scenario, we're releasing a weight. We are removing that sparsity of 36 to 55. That's gone, which means you have more dollars in the base, which means that if a district was not benefiting from that sparsity, they would see their base go up and they wouldn't be losing out on any weighting versus a district that was. So, for example, just to flash between the two. So if you look here, Kingdom South is now minus 4% in the scenario B2. On the prior slide, they were up 1.1. That's because you've removed sparsity spoiler, in B2, the only VSBA region that's sparse in the scenario is Kingdom North. So every other region that was getting that sparsity weight has now lost it. You'll see Wyndham and Windsor again. That's why they're dipping down more, because they were getting that weighting and now they're not. And so that money has been redistributed around the state. And so you see Kingdom North, they're still sparse. So that's why you see that they have now increased by 12%. But on the other hand, you see Bennington is now only up 12%, whereas in an earlier scenario, they were up 18.5, 20. And that's because they are no longer getting their sparsity weight. So this is, a way to look. This is more of a better way to do it. You can look across your scenarios and see how you can, of course, you can also see where you started with current law. And so either way, you can see that just to pick one, well, we'll just go with Bennington because that's at the top there. Bennington, in any of these scenarios, is receiving more funding than they spent in their FY25 education payment. But the amount is changing when you're tweaking those factors. Taking away sparsity in scenario B2 is lowering them, but allowing them to have their sparsity without grade weights in that as passed by the House, it's giving them the most because the grade weights are taking away from the base, which means that their sparsity weight is now driving fewer dollars to the region. So this is just an interesting way to think about, if you, in this construct, this methodology, by changing one thing, you can really see different results in different regions, and how if you make one change, you can cause perhaps unintended consequences in a different district's funding. Now you'll see in some cases, such as, again, it's at the top, so I'll just say Addison, in none of these scenarios will they get back to their FY25 payment, but that's because, they don't have a sparsity weight, they don't have a small school weight, so they don't benefit from that. Also, this is about giving them dollars, not, okay, pass a budget, pay taxes that can support higher levels of spending than a foundation, which is giving every student that base amount plus the weighting. And so those two, and they just happen to be at the top, so it's easy to pick them, but that's actually a really good scenario of how, you can really just have some areas that are always going to be brought up, but the level, it depends on which weights and the amount. And then you'll see some, like Central Vermont, where you see that they come up or they come down depending on the scenario. Central Vermont is really a good to see that, you could do a little higher, you could do a little lower, just depending on the population. So I know this is a lot of numbers and information to throw at you, but just a few more things to end on, just some considerations. So I think I've touched on this a little bit. I think Julius reiterated it. We're going to say it again. These estimates are only designed to reflect how different base and weight decisions would affect funding if we stuck to that 1.88 current spend of current education payments. They don't reflect any other research saying you should spend this amount. This does not reflect that. This just says if you stick with weights A, B, and C, that's what will happen. Not saying no value judgment that those are the right numbers. Just want to reiterate different district configurations, 119 or 2, anywhere in between, you can have different outcomes. And then again, this only considers the education opportunity payment. There's no supplement to district spending. There's no categorical aid in here. And if supplemental district spending was implemented, how that affects is something that should be considered, but it's not for this modeling, as that was not the charge given to us for this scenario. So that's all I have for you all. I have a few links at the back of the slide deck if you want to take a look at some of the testimonies, presentations, or memos that have been released and posted there for you all.
One of the things that feels relevant to this spreadsheet or, you know, whatever section of work we're in is the inflator.
Hmm.
And I don't know when we're gonna get to that, because I think that, you know, if people are looking down the road and we tie it to current spending levels, but we try to be really fair about the inflator, as people have asked us to take into account healthcare spending, et cetera. I just don't know when we're gonna kill that question.
Well, we'll get to it when we get to the language that goes with this. And right, the House version has
NEPA?
the-
No, that,
which is, what's it called?
So there's NIPA, but also I believe that there's language that JFO will do a inflator study over the summer to determine if that is
Yeah.
the most accurate for Vermont or not.
Yeah,
Okay.
that number, and then David's recommendation was to use something other than, hers was to use something more. NIPA is tied, it's kind of like CPI, but maybe with more of a weighting, it's different, more of a weighting for
the cost driver.
So Dr. Colby used the BLS's ECI index. And so that's the I think, and I want to say that it was focused because you can choose occupation. I want to say it was focused down to elementary and secondary occupation because you can pick all civil occupations.
But is it a national index?
Yes, it's published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Okay.
it's going to tend to be higher, I suspect, than other. That's what, that's.
No, I mean,
that's the-
we have a
yeah.
uniquely
Yeah.
high healthcare cost in Vermont and housing costs.
But the House version came out with it in the short run.
With the current law inflator
Yeah.
of the NIPA, yes.
Just want to point out just the irony, at least from what I'm looking at, that the column with the lowest bottom line is current law as compared to the 4 other scenarios. Something to think about.
It is
Fun.
interesting. Yeah.
What,
Funding amount,
Okay, I'll work out to the 1.88.
what,
there's a difference of 10 grand.
If-
I mean,
if,
Yeah.
if I can,
No, that's a it's grand.
if I,
Right.
to clarify,
Right.
Senator, if you would, I could make them totally the same. It's just you would have to carry out to the cents.
Mhm.
So if the goal was to have it be to the penny, we could model that. Just to clarify, the goal was to get the 1.88 billion and round it up to whole dollars.
Right.
Yeah, and so since the base is what I was modeling, if that is a request to have it be exactly with no increase whatsoever, that could be modeled as well.
I get what you're saying now. Okay, yeah.
Yes, that I'm not proposing that the state should pay or should spend extra dollars.
Oh, yeah, no, I was just pointing
Well,
out something that,
I mean, I think it's a point well taken that I mean, this is what I had said all along, and there's people who don't agree outside of this room, but I don't know if we agree inside of this room why I haven't questioned those weights that help drive at poverty and things like that is because this to me really obviously reshifts who can just spend money versus who should be spending the money, but they don't tend to vote up their budgets or they don't tend to want to spend that much. This seems to me to just say you can take the same amount of money and reallocate it so that 2 districts next to each other are not spending wildly different amounts on their kids, even if they have the same poverty needs.
Yeah, so that's what this would do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like it
Gets,
hurts some of my people, but it's a fair thing to do at this point.
yeah, the whole, I mean, as we know, the current system is producing perverse results. For a lot of complicated business.
Yeah.
So, we had, yesterday, we had this today, and, I guess the part of what we want to do today is just sort of get a temperature check for, how do we want to proceed? John can't do his work until we have figured out what we are plugging in.
Right. Do you want to go on?
Yeah, I'd love to get some reaction. Yeah, there are some thoughts about how to proceed.
I circled scenario B2. First of all, I really appreciate all of this analysis and work, and I actually really like the elegance of B2 for, you know, kind of taking in smallness into account, but not overweighting smallness, in a way that we always look back and say, why did we do that? Because we were trying to sort of be fair to everyone, and the rural schools folks came in and said, give us the same amount of money and we'll do fine, you know? So I want to take them at their word and be less generous there, but pretty fair overall. So I liked B2. I think at first glance, my two most controversial asks from the language would be to have independent schools fall under the graduation requirements.
That would take a lot of testimony, a lot of more. That's a very complex issue. Actually, we're trying to. The goal here was not to revamp how we handle independent schools, just get them into the system with the existing structure.
Okay. I mean, I think it would be fair to say that we didn't take enough testimony on any proposal to instill graduation requirements across the state.
Right.
So if we were to move in that direction, we might as well do everyone at once. So we're clear that we have the same graduation requirements across the board.
That's very complicated for independent schools to have. But
Why?
you could turn this into, the students that they had boarding students, and they actually probably have, they may well have higher, I don't know.
Winooski has international students,
Yeah.
you know, so I would say they should be able to leap
Or
and
maybe-
bounds meet the graduation.
Or maybe turn that into a study, because I have a feeling it's more complicated.
Okay, so I said my two most controversial asks, and that we keep the province in, we keep Canada in, but we limit all of it to a 25-mile radius around the state border. Those are my two big asks, and then I have lots of little language changes.
Which you worked up, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So,
Yeah, so I fully recognize, I support the need to reflect the additional costs at grade 6 through 8 and then 9 through 12 incur. I think we ought to reflect that. I'm not completely sold on B2 only because I don't have my head around sparse versus small school. I think sparsity and a small school is a real factor. I think that a small school, but not in a sparse zone, is not a real factor. And I think that sparse and not a sparse area, but no small school is also not a real. I think we really need to focus on sparse and small schools being something that we react to. And we need to just take a moment to analyze the other two scenarios. That's just 2 cents.
I think it was the intent is to try and get it.
I think that's the intent.
Yeah.
But I think we need to make sure that the language,
Right. And it's hard for me to let go of things. I'm gonna have a hard time letting go of the idea that just like when we do tax policy and we try to flatten out the little things that were some senator's pet project or whatever, that we take all of those categorical aid categories on top of the education fund. And we say, do we need those anymore if we're doing this more fairly?
I would agree. Specifically, I would agree that the transportation category,
Yeah.
transportation category may already be covered under sparsity, and the school meals may already be covered under FPL.
Mhm.
Just
And small schools is hopefully covered under small schools. But
so anyway, that's worth a couple of hours just to make sure we get it right. That's all. Special ed, that's its own category. I'm not gonna.
yeah, I agree. I don't think
I'll hold on.
I'll promise.
Yeah, I think I'll have it. I definitely need to spend more time making sure I actually fully understand what I'm looking at. I've got an idea, but still a few steps behind, I think. There's a lot to take it.
I would make one other comment, which I made maybe inappropriately at the very beginning, but the factors, FPL, EL, even maybe the small school, I think we at least need to touch that again. Because I look back at the original document that had those numbers, and there's no references. I get it that it was a study, serious study, but is there any conflicting information? We just need to take a minute because, again, once we dedicate ourselves to these factors, we are fully committed to going down that road. And
What'd you say?
then heading to the cliff.
I do just like the idea of the more careful weights in all of those categories, like the 6 levels.
Yeah, because I was waiting for others, but I'll say that my temperature check on this would be too as well. That seems to me to be the most temperature, but
And I do agree with Senator Ron Hinsdale that in our language, we should put in something about how often we review the weights. So that we very methodically analyze this at certain intervals, whatever that appropriate intervals are.
which is a fair point, especially given how much the analysis has apparently changed.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some lead time, like in 2 years, this late will change this one.
Okay. So what do we do? What do we do tomorrow? I think we want to go back to the language and really focus on language, and try to get that put together. Because that's different. There's 2 ads going on here. And would it make sense to have John as a sort of a way to get a look at all the rest of the language that would come with this, slug it in B2, not with any real assumption that's where we'll end up, but have plug that in and do language accordingly, so we can actually look at that part of this, because there's a lot of, so, 20 pages of language around the weights as well that we need to start getting our head around.
Hello,
Yeah.
are you asking me something or
No,
am I?
no, I was asking the committee about whether, to the extent that we're, you're waiting, as opposed to waiting, that we look at, that we use B2 as the starting point. Or do you want to have more time to think about that? And I'd like to start walking through some, just for the parts of the language parts of what John says, but he needs this, he needs something.
Can we get a refresher as to why adding these pupil grade weights and restricting sparsity weights is a good idea? Not necessarily, not today.
No,
But-
I'll give you the grade weights are just reflective of current spending. Current spending on high schools is about 12% more.
And that's easy then to absorb and agree and move forward. It's the others which are real.
So sparsity weighting is, I think, the sense in Julie and Ezra chimed in on this thing. We have outside of Chittenden County, a whole lot of the state gets sparsity, even though a lot of the kids getting the extra weights for sparsity are going to large schools. And so there was some attempt to sort of, I don't know if the right term is weighting in, but we're thinking whether it makes sense to have, in going to that notion that Senator Weeks just was articulating of small schools in sparse areas makes sort of intuitive sense. But maybe the fact that so much of Vermont is getting that sparsity weight, even though the kids are going to large schools, may not actually make sense. As defensible as some of the other ways that they put it that way. That does then build then does build the what's that word, the top number, the base number, which so that's the rationale for at least taking a look at it. What we did.
I mean, at first glance, I don't know that I can get quite behind B2, considering of all the scenarios, it's the most harmful for this county.
Yeah.
Just wanted to put that out there.
And no, I will say that one of the things that we should have as a consideration here is the least disruption. I think we'll posit that maybe something to be thinking about. The least disruption is, can be. So that's just something that at least I've had in the back of my mind is.
Well, I think the promise we made to Vermonters was to sort of build in more equity and slow the growth. So we're tying it to current education payment amounts, but it is a mental exercise and thing. In 2 years from now, what will that be? And is that fair? If it gets inflated, so it's fairly level with what you get now, I districts lose out too, but maybe that's still fair that, it's not an unlimited upward trajectory. You have to constrain spending and look at spending differently. And I love the small school folks and I love Wyndham and Windsor. They are the ones who came in and said, we can spend the same amount of money as everybody else and keep our schools small. So that means that we just stop inflating things and let people, exist on a more level playing field.
And you lose the least in B2.
Do we lose the least?
Kidding. Eastern and Western should.
I'm not sure that's the right lens.
Right.
I think the right lens is
I'm
what's.
just clarifying.
I mean, sure, we all are biased and we should make sure we talk to other folks.
I think the lens is, doing the best for your county, while also taking into consideration the rest of the state. But we have our respective districts that we have to represent.
Well, let's call it a day.
Yeah.
I've got everybody. Thanks to everybody for the work. Beth, to Ezra, Julia, getting us here a lot today. So I would urge people tonight to really look at the language, because I think we, and maybe I'm reading the room, right, maybe pretty close to being able to get this down to something. But so focus on that tonight. We'll focus on that first tomorrow. We'll come back and we're working. Thanks, everybody.